Okay, yeah, I just wanted to get a quick kind of lighting. I'm not sure if I'm going to stay with this. I might wait till it gets a little bit more darker, but I want to clue this in real quick, so I'd keep it in mind about the amphibious jade Hoover. Yeah, impedance and ambience. Shows about 90 watt light scribe sprite. And it's kind of like the principle I was just referring to a little bit earlier. Yeah, about the deal about the P and the S band switch and forward, reverse, and like the intelligence, the opposite, and all that stuff about the pronunciation, and when it's visible it's silent, and when it's visible it's not, like the integrating deal about the P and the R between the R between the county and the country, and the P and chronological from left to right. Normally it's followed by an S when the P is silent normally. Or, the exact opposite, which is actually the same principle of like Sarah in the King James Version Bible and the Sahara. I mean, using the same letters, whether it's visible or not, but it's like it's all integrated in like practical application that way. It's probably one of the first that I've really thought of that's really only that way. And it also reminds me of all of a sudden, like immediately like a Living Color song. I'll tell you, 1 and 1 makes 3. And it's probably the one, it seems to be the connectivity, like Chuck Woolery on the Love Connection, the 2 and 2 thing. And it's probably the one, after all that alphanumerics linguistics, is finally ultimately getting to like Sarah and the biblical reference and the desert. And ultimately also the book, like the Secrets to Simple How the Federal Reserve Runs the Country. And, some history about the De Beers diamonds in the book, reflecting Europe and the euro dollar. And a German-owned diamond getting raw diamonds from the Africa era predominantly. And this, I mean, at this point, if my memory serves me correctly, it's about the Euphrates and the Sahara thing about the Africa side. And I thought about the Chevrolet geoprism as geoprism thing, about the colors of the luminance in nano, measured in nanoluminance. Likewise, the same being of night vision, yet the exact opposite between day and night, but still of nanoluminance, of like the color and the radiance of a rainbow, like reflected in the prism in the shapes and the cuts, the way diamonds are, as well as a prism itself being, the same practical application of a diamond, and the colors of a rainbow that way. And even the color codes of like the International Electronic Engineering in that way. Yeah, so I was thinking about something about that with my thing about the amphibious jade Hoover. Yeah, I'll have another one. Yeah, I'll have another amphibious jade Hoover. Impedance and ambience, size about 9090 watt. Yeah, the light scribe sprite. Yeah, and the P and the P, the S and the P in sprite being flipped, being like the sign, and the R silent, like when you see it with a practical application of the P, when you see it as silent, and like switch and reverse it. I mean, it's all integrated in practical application that way of like, I mean, an integrating easement between like linguistics and alphanumerics and practical application and principle and like analytical that way. And it's like one of the only ones, like I said, like it also reminds me of it's probably the one of like Living Color. I tell you, 1 and 1 makes 3, the cult of personality thing about it, that song. And it's probably not the only one, but it's probably like the one that seems to be like very much about international financial management and importing and exporting on an international worldwide level. And certain factors of beyond like even like an electronic grid, it seems to be more and more of like a the deal about memorial, or not making a grade beyond internet protocol of like a local area network, or the Abraham Lincoln thing about night vision and the hood ornament being the vertical rectangle, and it being a 90 degrees seems to be like the automatic deal about the the baseball field, and the seemingly so deal between the VantageLove30 of the tennis court and the marginal spread that way, and ultimately the 90 degree right angle of like the baseball field, and the seams of the baseball and the tennis ball having that integrating practical application of the seemingly so, and how the seams are virtually identical in design. Yet practical application, a principle, in its own placement that way. Yeah, so like it's something like that. And I was just like to think about that with like Sarah being like the most beautiful woman in like the King James Version Bible, and in the Christianity thing about it, and some distinguishable difference between Sahara and Sarah, and the Chuck Woolery, the Love Connection. He does the 2 and 2 like that. And it seems like be the deal with the P being silent, normally followed by an S. and when it's reversed, it would be almost like, the Sprite situation. And it seems to be so like, it right now about the Sprite. And like, I like the Sprite new thing is, yeah, I'll have another amphibious, J. Edgar Hoover, impedance and ambience, because those are the two. Impedance and ambience are the two of the 13 band graphic equalizer. And the significance of 13 being like alphanumerics of 99, telepathic, and all that stuff. Geographically of Washington, D.C., and the name, Chevy Chase's name, and automatically, his name in Washington, D.C. is like an automatic perception of like the Department of Education, really beyond it, truthfully so. Getting into the practicum, and it seems to be like, the practicum, yeah, so the Chase practicum being like the alphanumerics of like Chase practicum Joseph's is like a 213 telepathic brainwave Chevrolet Silverado, and Chase practicum, it's either the I think it's 177. I'll actually have to think about it again. 177 like mental telepathy, but it's like yeah, the Chase practicum seems to be like the deal that's the curriculum that's really beyond the high school thing or the word education normally associated. Even at an associate's level, there's grades and making a grade beyond the internet protocol. There seems to be so very much more involved that some people are fortunate enough to be really aware of and really know all about it, and like really born into like a grade that's not even taught in a way other than possibly it being manufactured by the highest levels of like the people on this like entire planet for real. But anyway, seems to be like the real deal about the thing about in my mind, like right now, is the humor that seems to be like, yeah, I'll have another amphibious J. Edgar Hoover. Impedance and ambience being this the pastel green and pastel red. The pastel green of ambience on the 13-band graphic equalizer being the ambience on the positive side. Not that it has to be limited to like a constant. It would be like a positive, like of a capacitor, an overflow of the supply in a direct circuit, like a capacitor suggests that way of ambience. Likewise, or even the word transfiguration in the Book of Thessalonians, which is now which is the word transfiguration like 192. It's like the whole entire point of like the power of God, and something about the Mount Olives and a little bit of humor about that, but really, the humor is so very much, it's sometimes, and it's phenomenally the greatest medicine on the face of the planet, and there's something really about laughter that really goes really beyond humor. It's like for real. Anyway, so something like that, and not that it really has to be, but yeah, the humor sometimes originates. Yeah, the deal of laughter is so therapeutic sometimes in its own way, beyond probably anything that can be like found really truthfully so. But anyway, so I was like kind of like thinking about that in that way, because it's true about that. But anyway, yeah, so that way, like with the thing that I was really like folks thinking about as far as like Sarah biblically, and the book Secrets of the Temple, How the Federal Reserve Runs the Country, and ultimately getting to the equator and what that is to my thought, even the kernel or the kennel, or like Abraham Lincoln in Night Vision, and the pronunciation, rearranging the letters and it being kennel, and what that is to the telekinetic deal of like national security. Normally, it's not really within a close enough time frame to maybe immediately have the connectivity, but normally national security, if it's ever mentioned, it's very, extremely rare that national security even puts anything out about it would even suggest like telepathic communication, or not even in my entire life have I heard really anything on television about alphanumerics, really truthfully so, but, or, combining, that with like the algebraic test of inversion, probably the only thing about algebra, really the significance of the alpha, the absolute values of like the vertical bars, going all the way through it, and it gets far beyond, and into the exclusionary rule provision. It seems to be like the ultimate deal about the delta force in that way, and what the triangle is to the one line, or what that is in light year, yeah, for real. And anyway, so like my thing about I just want, it's already going on like close to 9.5 minutes right now, but I'm going to keep this kind of like short for right now, because I'm probably going to do a little bit later on tonight with a little bit better lighting, and maybe not so bright to where it'll show the laser animation and the lighting effects that you're seeing right now. But I don't know if I'm going to add any more right now. I might not. I might turn, I have like a truss back there. It's kind of like, it lights the entire wall up, and most of the ceiling and the cathedral ceiling, but right now, like, I have a tent, like, as compared to when I had my drums set up, I mean, it's kind of like I had to tire. It's like the truss is like normally set up where my drums are used to be normally. I have to set up and rearrange it again, but yeah, like right behind me, it's like it shines like all the way over, and when I record, you know, I do recording on both front and behind me, and the lighting truss is like right behind me, and when the fog's in the air, I mean, it like really shows all the laser beams in midair. It's my predominant reason, you know, for that is when I, you know, put the fog for the lighting, you know, the special fog for the lighting, you know, specifically, you know, for that reason, showing the laser beams in the different colors and all that stuff about the strobe lights and, you know, all the effects lighting that way. So anyway, yeah, so that's where really what you're seeing, like right on me and like behind me, but without any fog. Seeing the lasers in midair is normally not going to happen. But anyway, yeah, so like anyway, yeah, so in any case, yeah, so like you know, I was thinking about the amphibious J. Edgar Hoover, impedance and ambience, Shazbot 9090, Watt, light scribe sprite. Okay, and it's like the P and the S principle that normally would be the perception of the P being silent followed by the S. Although what light scribe would only suggest would like the one and only, you know, sprite being the clarity and clear as compared to, you know, any other cola. And all that stuff about I like the sprite and Eisenhower, and I like Ike, and all that stuff about, like, you know, Eisenhower in that way, and all about the Native American Indian thing. All of a sudden, through the Statue of Liberty, all the way back to the Eurodollar, and yay, yeah, all that stuff about yeah, the connectivity between the Statue of Liberty and the telepathic TV and all that stuff. Well, anyway, so like anyway, I was wanting to add the light scribe about it because, you know, it ultimately seems to be like a Robert E. Rubin factor of, like, even, you know, the secrets of the Temple Hot Federal Reserve runs the country, and it's like I chose all these books, and it just seemed like naturally. I mean, you know, when a person's going through a circuit and they see, like, you know, what a right to assemble might not normally be perceived as going through a circuit, and, you know, ultimately getting to the aggregates of domestic monetary and domestic monetary and gross national product. I mean, seeing all that and maybe not even realizing it in the way of a claim of having a right to assemble. You know, whether or not if annotation would, you know, be the right, whether it's like participation is like mandatory or requirement or enforced, or, you know, I mean, who's kidding who about, you know, having a right to assemble, huh? So anyway, like I choose Zildjian that way too, about having a right to assemble. You see, I'm a drummer, okay? So since I have a right to assemble, yeah, yeah, it's not limited to, but yeah, I choose Zildjian, yeah. Yay, all right. Yeah, it's like really good, but anyway, yay, all right. Something about the, you know, Switzerland, Geneva, Switzerland, and some meetings and all that good stuff, right? And what the equator is, yeah, even that, yeah, so for real. So anyway, yeah, so like I was thinking about that because of Robert E. Rubin had ultimately led to the factor of, like, you know, Los Angeles, a governor is president, or 109 is 110 in the 247 thing. And, you know, the alphanumerics of the 147 being, you know, like Robert E. Rubin, and what that is to even to the 12 tribes of Israel and the one tribe of Reuben being of the scribes, being the tribe of Reuben, the way it's spelt and all that stuff once again. And how it's spelled with Robert E. Rubin's name, or, you know, the E. Reuben being just one word, Reuben, the way it's spelled in the King James Version Bible. It's one of the 12 tribes of Israel, being, you know, one of the 12,000 of the 12, ultimately 12, you know, tribes. 12,000 is like 144,000 anyway. And the thing about, you know, the tribe of Judah, okay, and being a musician, and you know, automatically something in my mind of Sarbanes-Oxley financial instruments and stock compliance. Not limited to, you know, in any kind of way, but, you know, ultimately, you know, the connectivity between the 12 Federal Reserve Banks and the separation between church and state, and so many things that seem to be, you know, so much about the equator and the operator that way of, like, operator being alphanumerics 108 and Chevrolet and bicentennial, or, you know, or zero being, you know, 64 and HTTP, and, you know, the colon double forward slash thing about, in my mind, you know, the Austin Powers Blue Bonnet Imperial Eagle that way, and what the eagle is to the U.S. dollar, and what Geneva, Switzerland, and all this stuff about human capital, human civil rights is, and what having a right to assemble is or is not, you know, going through a circuit, and if it's really only the factor of whether or not if going through a circuit is really, you know, the deal about the expenditure beyond, you know, some academics and you know, not thinking that it would have to be maybe a mandatory requirement, although yeah, that's really been going on and been through it kind of thing. So I'm like really not kind of ignoring something about it for real. But anyway, yeah. So like I was thinking about that because ultimately all the alphanumerics, to me, Robert E. Rubin, his name, when I was going through there, I mean, it's like really kind of like seeing so much of like Robert E. Rubin, and like he was like on in Wall Street like quite a bit, Wall Street Journal, and it's like I was really kind of like following him for a while, and during that time it seemed to be like I'm significantly, it seems like him being the Secretary of Treasury, and being the Secretary of Treasury is automatically a scribe deal. And the pronunciation of his last name, the way it's spelled, E. Rubin, as a United States Secretary of Treasury. Ultimately, I think his involvement was also including General Motors in a way of like, and how true it is with promissory notes with GMAC, I'm not real sure. Although, predominantly, studying the word de facto seemed to be the real big deal about what VantageLove 30 is to manufacturers of like, the Code 10 deal about annuity, electronic, and taxation that way. It seemed to be like the real big deal in combination with, even, the aggregates of like the monetary, domestic, and gross national product, or even the history of the television provision screen and what Technicolor is, even, certain factors of like the way I see even Oracle Corporation between database administration and middleware and firmware. And, quite a bit I've been thinking about in Technicolor way of the history of television. So it's kind of, in the White Earp and that Hopsing deal about it, and John Wayne, and it seems to be allowing me so it's really, I've studied it like so very much. It seemed to be like it's ultimately gotten to like right now. It's kind of like the amphibious J. Edgar Hoover impedance and ambience. And what the 13 colonies of like American history is to the Native American Indian, the 13 stars on the back of the side of the U.S. $1 bill, and the 13 band graphic equalizer. And I think at the time, the 80s being like 80 and the answer and all that stuff, and that way, it's I think based upon the 13 band graphic equalizer, I think that the only availability that I knew of that I really cared to get anyway was a 200 watt 13-band graphic equalizer. Ultimately, I had like many of them, but ultimately it got to the Clarion was like my thing about like the one that like really, but like through all that process, I had like all kinds of like 13-band graphic equalizers, normally 200 watt, and the LED readout. It's like obvious, but like very rare did like any manufacturer even put them on as a display as a. Whether it really wasn't any identified at any significant time as whether it was like a meter or a signal strength, although ambience identified as the pastel green and impedance as the red, and they weren't even on the same 13-band graphic equalizer at all. Not at one time did I ever see like the impedance and ambience on the same. And I wasn't even looking for it, but it's just like I'm going on my memory, and I don't remember seeing like any impedance and ambience on the same 13-band graphic equalizer. It seems to be the big deal about night vision. Ultimately, back to the President Abraham Lincoln, and what Abraham Lincoln is set in the dark is to like the rectangle. It seems to be the big deal about the hood ornament and the vertical rectangle that way, and what the 90-degree right angle is to the wide area network and the wide world of sports that way. Of a 90 degree, and it seems to be like the deal that ultimately gets to between the tennis ball and the baseball and the marginal spread of VantageLove 30 and the ground rule double likewise with like 90 degree of a baseball field, and what asymmetrical is to pi r squared to the 90 degree being like a quadrant automatically of even globalization based on pronunciation, and ultimately it still is a quadrant, which has its practical application and definition, which is a 90 degree. Likewise, if you've seen it on a map as a spherical quadrant, but yet still a quadrant, and yet, truthfully, in attenuation and processing speed of like digital readout display, like measuring cycles per second and oscillation, ultimately, if it's like a freeze frame, it'll really look like an intersecting factor, if not the Christian thing about the fish, or the intersecting axis, of like Audi that way, when it, like a free frame of measuring cycle per second frequency and oscillation is really about that, and that's really, not limited to what I view as the fish thing about, the Christian symbol that gives the impression of the fish, but my thing is like the Audi axis and the cycles per second of like really what I'm talking about right now, but yeah, so I mean, all that stuff about the liquid equity, or above sea level or below sea level. It's ultimately got to the thing about Abraham Lincoln and the night vision, that way of the principle of the movie. A lot sometimes the title or the cover charge or the cover. You've probably heard it before. A picture says 1,000 words, and sometimes that's so very true. Because a lot of, when I was kind of like realizing something about the book cover, and some of the information and content, seemed to be completely not what the perception would be of the picture, and seemed to have the connectivity, but what the book is about is completely a whole different ballgame. And it's almost like like I was just like referring to it today earlier, between like Data Foundry and TX Wave Media, and NRG. As far as the stack and the cabinet deal goes, it seemed to be like the deal between like the SAN software of like locations of color code of like what used to be the Marathon Tower and San Felipe and Data Foundry, as a matter of fact, as well as the Marathon Oil Tower power thing, and they've relocated. But anyway, there's a lot going on, and the locations of Data Foundry, which is on the north side of Houston, and compared to some of the information, there's a little bit about the greens area, and it seemed to be like the color of like a province in like world history in a way, of like the pastel green, what that is out there at that location, as well as the color code of the building and stuff of like Marathon, where Data Foundry likewise is up in the same building. But anyway, it seemed to be like San Felipe, and the acronym of SAN software being like the International Financial Management Deal, the acronym of a considerable amount of like a storage area network, as well as like securities and annuities network that way. And I was kind of like looking at it, I was thinking about it, because, as far as like energy goes, NRG as compared to like Reliant and the International Electronic Engineering, some of the information that was giving like a International Financial Management, as far as like Data Foundry goes, is a predominant deal that seemed to be like, the information available when I was like really beginning, like years ago, looking at it, has like kind of like changed, and now it's kind of like what's going on with it like now completely. But anyway, it seemed to be like the website was like an integrating factor between the International Electronic Engineering and NRG, being a format more of a power grid as compared to what would be maybe an electronic, maybe a principality, powers and principality in high places thing about the the principle of electronics, more so of software and networking as compared to the hardware and the power, of the grid. And that was like something I was like really noticing about the website as far as the information. It seemed like a whole new perception of what information had thoroughly been, obviously given the impression of the same, yet maybe not aware of, and very visible, like right now anyway. And it seems to be a thing that's going to be, whether if the change about all that is going to be remain the same, yet maybe give a perception, not necessarily if it has to be a difference in appearance, but meaning the same thing that way. Seems to be like what's going on, kind of like, the thing about it right now. But yeah, so I was kind of like thinking about that, because I was looking at NRG as far as like something about the networking that when I was like looking at it, automatically when I looked at it and saw a change like Data Foundry, the similarities of like what would normally be identified as a stack in networking, like a IP address and presentation and all the layers and tiers, and sometimes identified with a trunk, and how true that is about the one deal about it, a trunk. Normally with like something like with Cisco, it would like present maybe what switching and routing would only mean normally as when hubbing's involved, normally of hardware, giving the impression of hardware. Yet like with software, normally what a hub does is actually what would be maybe prevent congestion or a buildup or a hotspot, and like it reroutes everything to like like a traffic light would, and it wouldn't be so congested in a way of like what would be identified as a hotspot that a node actually represents in software, that way of running performance monitoring like of network operation as compared to hardware. And everything that goes through a node, I mean, like even in anatomy, I mean, once it's going through it, it's not going to be switched and routed. I mean, there's like only one way through it until it gets to another point, as compared to what a hub is, representative of what maybe would be practical application of a hub, and complete exact opposite, yet the same thing at the same point of a node. Like a hub, like dissipates all the heat and reroutes it and switches it, and like does it a lot faster and more efficiently as compared to a node. I mean, what's ever going through it, no matter how much, it's going to go through it. And sometimes that's why it's referred to as a hotspot, and sometimes these other forms of attention to maintain and maybe regulate maybe what would maybe be more of a human factor, not necessarily always an automated predetermination or a preset. Sometimes require actual on-site location as compared to what an automated remedy or solution would provide. Yeah, so anyway, so like I was kind of like thinking about that in that way, because all this was kind of like going on in my mind. I'm like thinking about a lot of stuff that I've really spent years and years studying. And it's kind of like just now about the Sprite and the Sarah and the Sahara in the book 6 of the Temple, and how German owned the European, the Eurodollar, and the VantageLove30, and like the content of the book itself of 6 Simple how the Federal Reserve runs the country. It's like a love triangle, like on a worldwide scale. And even the sliding point of like the power on, power off of the iPhone SE between like what seems to be, the deal of the ERISA statute and the IRA and the ERISA and the IRA, the difference being the SE between the acronym and the SE being, the obviously still about 24, and the RF of the redundant frequency, the Homeowners Association, HOA, GMAC, and then promissory notes, and the deal about the IEEE of the International Electronic Engineering, as well as some other factors involving that. So, it's kind of like really looked at that way, and Robert E. Rubin being the deal about, like in my mind, what is now like the last one that I know of is of area codes of Los Angeles being 323, and what they is, like a governor is president, or 109 is 110, like a governor is president, or like Los Angeles is 110, Los Angeles is president, or Los Angeles is governor, is president, or the alphanumerics of 247, and how LightScribe and one of the 12 tribes of Israel being Reuben, and the scribe being like, even of, to me, it's just like, I mean, the deal for it is written, like, I mean, if it's the ultimate like hypothetical metaphor, is there like another Mount Rushmore I need to know about for real, for real. But anyway, in any case, yeah, so it seems to be like something about the forefathers of the nation that way. And what that is to even the power square factor, normally the power square factor is normally using 3.1416, with the radius squared. Normally squared represents, added to itself twice, it being the radius. Yet squared itself normally isn't taught as a symmetrical asymmetrical issue, presenting that its own formula in computation with itself all over again. It's not even really taught that way, based upon everything I knew of, like involving power square being used and using radius to find a diameter. Ultimately getting to the isometric thing about beyond the two-dimensional flat plane surface of isometrics into the three-dimensional of isometrics, given the thought of projected actual participation, and identified it as volume that way. Even the Fred Flintstone thing about the pi r squared twice, I mean, for real, it's like a Fred Flintstone deal for real. And what car is to 22 in the cartoon, and the tune being 64, and HTTP:// and all that stuff about the operator. Ultimately, I mean even Fred Flintstone's will, why reinvent the wheel when you have Fred Flintstone identifying some fine upstanding 90 degree about even the car songs, life's the same, I'm moving in stereo, life's the same except for Fred Flintstone's shoes. Yeah, so some humor about that, but I mean, it's so like for real it sometimes. So anyway, I wanted to get that in about the J. Edgar Hoover, the amphibious J. Edgar Hoover, impedance and ambience, size about 9090, watt, deal about the LightScribe Sprite, and the deal about Sarah and Sahara, and the Chuck Wooler 2 and 2 deal about the P being silent normally followed by an S, or the exact opposite in Sprite, and even Sahara and Sarah, biblical reference, even identifying the desert, that's predominantly the area of the Euphrates. in the book Secrets of the Temple of a German-owned, a European German-owned diamond, getting raw diamonds in the Africa area, predominantly in the Euphrates area, or what UL listed is to the pronunciation of Yule, or like Yule Brenner, like the Ten Commandments and Pharaoh and Moses being, all that stuff about 71 in Pearland and biblical reference that way of even Egypt being, the deal about the pyramid on the backside of the US $1. So I mean, like, I was wanting to include all that real quick because I'm probably going to, do this when I feel a little bit more comfortable with the lighting, with the lasers and the special effects lighting and all that stuff, and maybe try and keep it concentrated and straight to the point. But I mean, here lately it's been, when I started getting beyond, the first like 1 hour, it normally stayed, several times at an hour. I could probably speak all day and night like this for like a whole entire week, non-stop, maybe just to take a break to use the restroom, maybe drink, maybe eat something real quick. But anyway, yeah, for real. But anyway, yeah, so like, I wanted to include that real quick, and I'm going to take a break because, hey, all right, yeah, there it is, okay?